Hey guys, welcome to my quick sketch demo. There are several places online where you can use the web page to generate poses so that you can practice quick sketches. The idea is to capture gesture and not get bogged down with detail and just focus on the bare essentials of the pose, the movement. And for these sketches, I set the web page generator to give me 2-minute poses. I would recommend you do a couple pages in your sketchbook of quick sketches. And the idea is not to spend forever, but just to keep your drawings clean, look at the overall shape and the movement. You can start to get into overlaps if you have time, but generally these go pretty quick. I would say try to fit about 8 figures on one page. And if you have time, just clean it up a little bit. But generally, that's all you're gonna get probably in about 2 minutes. Looks like I got another ballet dancer pose that's similar. When you get poses that are very flat to the picture plane, it's very easy to measure. I think it's when you start getting foreshortening that's when it gets really challenging to measure. But that's when the use of the plumb lines come in. So this one is still a very flat pose. You could see how I made the legs equal length from the crotch to the knee and the knee to the ankle. Same with the arms, it's fully stretched out, so it's very easy to measure from the shoulder to the elbow and from the elbow to the wrist. I use long sweeping lines. And you notice that I don't even draw the head because it's about the movement of the body that is the biggest part of the gesture. Sometimes I'll start with the head, but I think a lot of the times it's good to just focus on the core. So now I have a little time. I'm going to look at overlaps, what's in front, and that's all I have time for. These are a great way to warm up, and it will challenge you to draw any and every pose. Not all of the poses are practical, but that's not really the point. The point is just to study the movement and pay attention to how the weight is distributed. Sometimes I like to use a curve for the inside of the arm and two straight lines on the outside, because that's where the elbow is, so it's more angular. It's a quick way of simplification. This is basically shorthand, and I'm thinking just basic cylinders. The hand is like a square. This is a guy throwing a punch, by the way. Okay, looks like there's some lens distortion that makes this leg look longer, and we're kind of looking down in my reference, so just real quickly fix that. This one is a good example, I think, to start with like a pillowcase, like how animators like to draw. It's an arrow list, and the hip is on top, the torso is on the bottom, and she is making a triangle with the shape of her legs. And as you can see, when I'm drawing the torso and the pelvis, I'm already thinking about the complex side and the simple side. Same with the arms and the limbs. For the head, I don't want to go in and draw every feature, but I want to indicate at least which direction the head is heading, is facing in. And this video is the real time actually, so this is how fast or how slow I'm really drawing, and these are 2 minutes each. This looks like another ballet. It's a ballet dancer who's very flexible, so her back is arched, one leg is way up, and she is holding her leg. Again, here the outside of the arm I use two straights, the inside I simplify it with a curve. When you're drawing 2-minute poses, you gotta be quick. So always try to simplify as much as possible. I'm trying to use elegant curves, which are C curves and S curves. My male figures might have more straight lines just to make them look more masculine. The females would probably have more curves. Even the straight lines are a little bit curved. I'm always looking at the outside shape or the silhouette of the figure. It's okay to draw some smaller than others. If there's a pose that's hard to fit on the page without going over your other drawings. So here I'm looking at the shape and the angle. You can see for the leg, since her leg is doing a split, I just use one sweep to approximate the angle, and then I come back in and break it up to show the separation between the lower leg and the upper leg. And the reason I drew the line from the top of the head to the top of the toes is so that I can see the negative shape that it creates. Starting with the head on this pose. It's a yoga pose. Head is facing down and the legs are pointing upwards, or one leg is pointing upwards. And the other leg is hooked around the one of the arms. So it's like a frog pose? Not a frog pose. I don't know yoga. So when the legs are extended like this, I'm thinking about the distance between the head and the crotch and the ankle. Because one is half of that distance and the other is the second half. And her other feet is right there on the elbow. The cool thing about drawing from photos is that most models can't hold any of these poses. 2 minutes is pretty long. Okay, so here's one with major foreshortening. We're looking up at this Thai kickboxer. We're looking at him from the bottom. He's standing on a floor that is see-through, so I see the bottom of his feet. And for foreshortening, I'm really looking at the shapes. I'm not thinking about, oh, I'm drawing a torso or a pelvis or anything like that. I'm just looking at the silhouette, and I'm looking at the angles. His left arm angles downwards, and his knee comes forward and slightly to his left. And to look for reference points, a good point to look at is where his ankle is, his left ankle, and where his left wrist is. Those 2 points are close to each other, so I'm looking at those. And to indicate the perspective or the foreshortening, I'm using overlapping lines in his center area or his core. Let's start off a clean sheet. Okay, so this is a very muscular guy, and I'm kind of using the pillowcase idea, starting with the torso down to the pelvis and down to his legs. He's low to the ground. And put in his spine in a second here. Now simplify his arm. Put in his back or his spine, and indicate the direction that he is facing in. Placing the ear and his other hand. So his left leg has a lot more foreshortening, and the right leg is more flat to the picture plane. Okay, so this is a stiffer looking pose, but there's a sweep to the arms. I always like to use one curve when the action continues from one limb to the other. Sometimes I'll draw an ending point to where I want my line to be and a beginning point, and then I'll just connect the dots. For example, for the leg, from the knee to the ankle. So there's the ear. We're looking at him from the back. He's jumping away from us. And you can see I drew a line that connected the knees. You don't always have to start the same way. This pose makes a shape between the legs and the arms. There's a lot of foreshortening. It's basically a guy lying down, grabbing his ankles, but he's facing away from us. So there's a lot of foreshortening because his body is going away from us. But try not to panic. When you have foreshortening, basically you're going to have more overlapping lines to show the foreshortening. But try to simplify it as much as possible. This model is hanging on to his feet, so his arm is here. And also you'll notice that when you have poses with foreshortening, one side usually has more foreshortening than the other. So his left arm is flatter to the picture plane. It's still coming at us, but not as much as his right arm. And since it's a cylinder, when the cylinder is coming towards us, it just looks like a circular shape. Okay, here I have another arching pose. I'm looking at the relationship between the pelvis and the head. Figures arching backwards. I'm looking at the negative shape that is between there. And I'm thinking about where the balance of the figure would be. How far is the head from the ground? What's the angle of the arms? And the angle of the legs? I'm looking at the negative space that the arch makes. Okay, her other leg points upwards. And in the middle where the folds are, I use overlapping lines. So if I only had 2 minutes, this is enough information. So if I want to come back to this later, I would know, or at least know how to continue this drawing if I had to. Okay, so I have a model lying down. Flesh is soft and the floor is hard. What will happen is where it meets the floor will appear flat because we take on the shape of the floor when the flesh gets pressed up against it. This looks like a fighter, like a MMA fighter on the ground, trying to defend himself. There's his left leg. And you can see I drew a line that connected his knees again to help me see the shape. His arm is coming towards the camera, so there's foreshortening here. When I see curves, I ask myself, is it a concave or a convex curve? It's good to record the correct one because it'll look obviously wrong if it's the opposite. This one I'm starting off with the head. It's mostly a pretty flat pose, but it's a good chance to show some overlapping in the where the hip meets the torso. And the great thing about doing these digitally is you could move them around a little bit, which is something you can't do on paper. So but these are for practice, they're not really for show, so it's all for you to familiar yourself with the proportions and gesture and loosen up on your drawing, learning how to simplify, practicing your draftsmanship, draw nice clean lines. And looking at shapes. You're gonna be constantly making decisions like, where should I use a straight line? Where should I use the curve? Where's the complex side? Where's the simple side? Where are the overlaps? I have another dancer here. Her back is super flexible, and I'm thinking about the weight distribution as I plant her feet. And her arms go backwards. You don't have time to draw every finger, so just the outline of the arm or the outline of the hand is enough. I'm drawing a line from wrist to wrist so I can look at the negative shape in between. And I'm looking at how far that her left arm or her left hand comes out compared to her feet. She's kind of like a bow shape. Lots of C curves in this pose. Here's another good pose for starting with the center of the body. It's another pretty flat pose, easy to measure. Remember line efficiency, simplification, overlaps, using the big sweep, and always looking at the shape and the angles, plus the negative shapes that are created in between the forms. And for the head, just indicating the tilt of the head. There's some hair. Normally don't draw hair in quick poses, but let's put it in because it helps show the direction that the head is facing in. Looking at overlaps. I'm used to doing these sketches with charcoal pencil on newsprint, but for the sake of the demonstration, I'm just doing these digitally. With charcoal, you get the bonus of getting line variation, but this is good enough for what it is, I think. And I get to be able to move things around after I'm done digitally, so that's one bonus. Okay, I'm going to scale these and position them a little bit nicer so you could see them, and we're going to analyze these a little further now that we've got 2 pages in there. And now let's look at little diagrams. I'm going to show you what I'm thinking about when I'm drawing. And one is the gesture and basic proportions. So a gesture is the sweep of the spine or the main movement of the body. If the leg creates a gesture compared to the spine, that creates a sweep that carries the pose. Even in foreshortened poses, it's there. So these are the curves that represent the movement that I'm capturing in the pose. A lot of these are C curves, and I'm just looking at basic proportions. such as, I know it's all bending, but from the head to the crotch and the crotch to the ankle, I'm just eyeballing that so that it's proportional. The second thing I look at is negative shapes, and I use plumb lines to help me see those negative shapes. So in this pose, the back of the leg almost goes straight up, and I'm looking at the negative shape between the back arch and the back of the leg. I'm looking at these spaces, and plumb lines you could use straight down from your reference point, your anchor points. So good anchor points are bony parts like the elbow, the wrist, the shoulder where the acromion process is. So those are anchor points. Knees, ankles. What this does is it helps me see how far that elbow comes out compared to the knee, or where they are in relation to each other if I were to drop lines that go straight down. So look at the negative shapes. These things help you measure. So in this yoga pose, I'm looking at the negative shape between the model's face and the floor. And the body creates this triangle. So what is that angle? It looks like a 45-degree angle right there. So that's what I see in my mind as I'm drawing these quick sketches. Big shapes. Use the horizontal and vertical lines to help you see those negative shapes. It applies to every pose, whether it's a flat pose or even on foreshortened poses like this one. So this is what I see in my mind as I'm doing the quick sketch. I can't show you while I'm doing it, but that's why I'm showing it to you here. So doing this inside my mind while I am doing the quick sketch helps me place the features more accurately. So these are called plumb lines. They could either go across or straight down or straight up from your anchor points or your point of reference. Okay, so there's your negative shape. I see this in my head as I'm drawing it, even though I don't draw it in there. Let's hop to the next page. Basic proportions and gesture. Here we go. Bunch of C curves. There's an arch in the back. Another arch. Sometimes you have S curves or very subtle S curves. So these are rhythm lines or sweeps. Try to see these when you're looking at the model or the reference that you're drawing from. is the essence of the pose. Think about whether or not your curve is concave or convex. That's very important. Think about where the overlaps are, what's in front. Overlaps happen where parts bend and fold. You'll also see it a lot in poses with foreshortening. And let's look at negative shapes using plumb lines. So mark an X where the negative shape is. When something is very foreshortened, the negative space is super important. This whole pose kind of fits into a square, and the negative shapes help you place the pose, almost like cutting out what doesn't belong to the pose. For this pose, if you draw a line across, you can see the wrists are at the same height and the knees are about the same height too. Okay, so the lying down pose is more like a sideways or a horizontal rectangle. Okay, so here I'm looking at the wrists, the elbows, the acromion process. These are all anchor points, and I'm looking at how the hip is in front of the torso, which creates overlaps. And some other anchor points are the knees, the ankles, and maybe the tip of the toes. That's it for this section. I hope that was helpful, and thanks for watching.